welcome everybody to this workshop on asset-based community development. And the title that we've given the workshop comes from one of our case studies that I'll say a bit more about in a minute. I believe in building people up. So that's a quote from one of the residents that we interviewed. Talking of one of our case studies, I am really pleased to welcome to the workshop Paul Wright, Sarah Farrer, Al Barrett and Claire, all from Hodgshill in Birmingham, who we've been working with during our research. So I'm going to give a really quick introduction, and then I'm going to hand over to Al to tell us a bit more about his work and his role as a vicar at Hodgshill Church in Birmingham. Then Paul, Sarah and Claire are going to have a conversation about asset-based community development on the Firs and Bromford estate, which is part of Hodgshill. I'm really looking forward to what I think is going to be a brilliant workshop. So just a bit from me on asset-based community development as a whole. So asset-based community development, or ABCD for short, because it is a bit of a mouthful, is an approach to being community that focuses on people's gifts and people's assets and a community's assets rather than on deficits. So it's about what is strong in a community as a starting point rather than what is wrong. It emphasizes neighbour to neighbour care, and so it's very much a bottom-up approach for change rather than a top-down approach of coming from government or experts. So this bottom-up change emphasizes that people are not problems that need fixing, but actually each of us has gifts and skills. And that has been really important in challenging stigma around experiences of poverty, and saying that actually deprivation statistics don't say everything about an area. They are important indicators in some respects, but if we just focus on them, then we become very much focused on deficits. And in that respect, narratives and what we say about people and about areas can become self-determining as to what people's futures will become. So asset-based community development gives us a different way of building a different future. That is a really quick overview of it, and there's a lot more that could be said. But instead, I am going to hand over to Al, who is going to talk to us about the Firs and Bromford estate and the work of Hodgshill Church on the estate. So over to you, Al, and thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. And hello, everybody. So I have been the vicar of Hodgshill for the last 11 years. Hodgshill is a Church of England parish on the east edge of the city of Birmingham. We're a parish of about 20,000 people, and a good third of that parish is the Firs and Bromford estate. Firs and Bromford was built in the 1950s and 60s. Tower blocks, terraces, masonettes, largely rehousing people who had lived in inner city Birmingham, in the Aston area, in what were called back-to-backs at the time. And originally it was one of those kind of ideal garden city outer estates with loads of space for people to spread out, and what they called at the time the kind of villages in the sky, the tower blocks, which were meant to be kind of wonderful centres of community. As we all know, some of those buildings were not quite as wonderful as people thought at the time. And over the years that have followed, it's been a place where, certainly if you measure it in terms of indices of multiple deprivation, one of the stories that could be told about our estate is that most of it is in the top 5 to 10% of most deprived in the country. That's one way of telling the story. Another way of telling the story is to listen to local people's experience of the area. And certainly when I arrived 11 years ago, one of the stories that I heard again and again was that this was a place that was underinvested in. It was overlooked, it was ignored, people's voices weren't heard. Organisations came in when they had funding, promised the world, and then left promptly as soon as the funding ran out, normally 1 or 2 or at the most 3 years later. It was a place where people often felt done to, certainly rather than done with. And even over the years that I've been here, it's been a place where we've experienced quite a lot of asset stripping along the way. The age of austerity has meant that various council-run facilities, for example, have been closed and taken out of the neighbourhood. So that's one bit of the story. Another bit of the story, with my dog collar and my vicar's hat on, is about Hodgshill Church. The building of St Philip and St James Hodgshill was built in the 1960s in the posher bit of the parish at the top of Hodgshill Common. In the 60s, it was a pioneering, cutting-edge bit of church architecture. It had loads of breakout rooms and flexible spaces. There was a badminton court laid out on the nave of the worship space itself. And it was a space that played host to lunch clubs and parents and toddler groups and sports clubs and all kinds of stuff, to the point that people would describe the building as a thriving heart of community. It was a place that was well used, a place that people came to for groups and activities every day of the week. Unfortunately, like a lot of 1960s church architecture, it was also a bit rubbish. It was built largely of concrete, it had lots of flat roofs, and by the early 2000s, there were all kinds of issues with the building itself, and the church congregation were facing a £500,000 repair bill. And one summer, a couple of years before I arrived here, some members of the church congregation went on holiday and came back a week later to find that their beloved building had been demolished. One of the ways that we tell some of our stories here, both of church and of wider neighbourhood, is to point to precipitating events, one of those crises that means that you kind of have no choice but to shift mode. In some communities, that might be a flood. For many of us, it might be a global pandemic, but certainly for Hodgshill Church, it was the closure of the church building that meant a real shift of understanding of how we did church, what mission was, and how we engaged with our community. And certainly when I arrived in 2010, coinciding with the new Conservative government and the age of austerity being announced and beginning, the question from church members was, how do we do this? We don't know how to do church anymore. We don't know how to do mission anymore. We don't know how to engage our neighbours. And what we did, and it was pretty much instinctive rather than following any kind of theory or model, was we mapped our area. We identified where the bumping spaces were that people naturally gather together and encounter each other. And we went out and we listened. We were really clear as a majority middle-class congregation in an area that would mostly identify as working class. We were really clear that our job was not to go out and do things to people, or even to go out and do things for people. Our role at that point was to go out with open hands, empty hands, and to listen. And so we listened to our neighbours, and we heard stories from folk locally who'd moved in when the houses were built, of a community that they loved and delighted in, but over the years they felt had gone downhill. We heard stories of folk who'd arrived much more recently as part of the quite radical demographic change in the area, from a majority white community to a community with many different nationalities and ethnicities that we live in today. We heard stories of of being welcomed warmly. We heard stories of people who felt like this was just a place where they slept and they did most of their living and their shopping and their praying elsewhere. But more than anything, we heard stories of local people being good neighbours to each other. Christians, Muslims, pagans, people who wouldn't identify with any faith perspective, but people who we heard and saw demonstrating compassion, generosity, trust, friendship, and hope among their neighbours. We heard stories of the postmaster at the local post office who would know when someone was poorly and would find out where they lived or where they were in hospital and would take flowers to them. We heard stories of grandmas picking up their grandchildren from school and picking up loads of others as well and taking them to their house and looking after them until their parents were able to pick them up later. We had countless stories like these. And for us as a church, this was a spur for us to say, stuff is happening in this neighbourhood already. People are loving each other, caring for each other. Our role is to be present among those stories, to make friends, to nurture trust, and to celebrate what's happening. And so one of the early things we did was we hosted an event we called Hodgshill Unsung Heroes, where we invited 97 local people who'd been nominated by their neighbours as unsung heroes in their community to come together and shared some of their stories. We asked people that evening, if you could find a couple of neighbours to join you, what would you start in your neighbourhood? And we were able to offer a little bit of support and nurture to some of those ideas to help turn them into reality. But more than anything, we learned through those early bits of the journey that one of the things that we as church can do is to inhabit those bumping spaces and to intentionally hear people to speech, intentionally nurture spaces where voices can be heard, where gifts can be unearthed, where passions can be unleashed, and where people can find connections with each other so that they're able to share their passions, gifts, and skills with their neighbours. And for us as a church, that helped stir a vocation which has now become a long-term journey, but has also presented us with all kinds of gifts that we're able to receive and rejoice in along the way, and all kinds of ways in which we've been challenged and have had to learn and change too. So that's a bit of our story.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Al. I am now going to invite Paul, who's going to have a conversation with Sarah and Claire. And yeah, over to you. I don't need to say any more.
Thank you, Stephanie. So kind of very much building on Al's story, just a very brief introduction to street connecting and community building. One of the things that the Unsung Hero event that Al talked about kind of really unearthed was the people in our community that give time and dedication to what we would call community building. So those people who know their neighbours, care for their neighbours, who look out for other people, bring people together. And about 4 or 5 years ago, we embarked on what you might call a bit of an experiment, but it was very much, how could we try and find more connectors, more community builders, and what we call street connectors? How could we find more of these people, bring those guys together, and work together to get to know our neighbourhood even better, unearth more gifts and skills and talents, and nurture our neighbourhood even more. So that's where Street Connecting started. And Sarah and Claire are two of the Street Connecting team, amazing community builders, amazing neighbours, and basically want to make sure that we can share their stories in the next 10 minutes or so. So Sarah, do you want to just tell us a bit about your time when you moved to the neighbourhood and the block that you moved into?
Hello everyone, my name is Sarah Farah and I've lived here now for the past 15 years, nearly 16 years. And when we first moved in, it wasn't very welcoming, or there was basically nothing for anyone, to be fair. When we first moved into the block, the people within the block was not very welcoming. They were quite hostile towards us. And it took me a while to actually get out of my house. My husband used to work night shift, so during the daytime, I used to be so scared to go out because he used to be quite verbal abusive towards us, and people were just not very nice at all. So one day I've decided, because I'm one of those people that don't like to be intimidated. And also I'm thinking, if you don't know me, you can't have an opinion about me. So get to know me first before you can have any kind of opinion. So I've decided to cook for the whole block. And then I went out and give people some food and came back. And 2 weeks later, we became quite close. People, I mean, food bond people over anything. And I found out one of the reasons why people were so hostile towards me was the person previous to me in that flat has been moved out of antisocial behavior. And that person was one of their friends, so they didn't like the new person in the flat. But it was nothing personal. So that from that day, I've decided to go and be more involved within the community and to get more integrated and to see what's around me, so I can have some kind of I don't know how to explain it, so I can integrate and get to know people within my neighborhood and also be part of my neighborhood, because it takes two. I mean, I need to integrate to become part of the community. At the same time, the community needs to be more open towards me and be more friendly towards me. So that's what happened. I get involved with the community and then became one of the street connectors. And yeah.
Cool. So something changed over the time. What do you think? What changed over that period of time? What was the change that you saw?
I think the community became quite a lot more diverse, and a lot more people have moved in. And I think more people with different background has moved in. I think more people became more tolerant and more open and quite nice. But then at the same time, people are a bit wary of who they are friends with and where they go. So a lot of the different communities seem to be staying to their own community, and which can be also be a problem, that the community within the community is not diverse or not integrating. So it's a bit difficult for new people coming in, not integrating. That can also cause a bit of a problem when they stick to their own culture or own community. So for me, I try as much as I can, try to get the people within different communities to be part of in the bigger community, because for me, I only see one big community. I don't see different diverse community.
That approach that you've taken and the approach that we take as a community to look for the best in people, try and bring people together, what difference do you think that makes?
Makes huge difference, because sometimes people don't know where to start and how to be integrated within the community. And because of language barriers also, they tend to stick to their own because they don't know any English. So it's nice when you can meet people who wants to integrate, who wants to be part of the community, but then don't know where to start and how to do it. And to have something for them and to signpost them places and say, you can do this, you can go there, you can talk to this person, is quite nice. Because I didn't have that when I first moved in. I have to do everything by myself. And it's quite nice to be able to do that for people now. And the community, the community we have and the people that we have that are so willing to go beyond and beyond above for people. It's quite nice.
There's something important about what you're talking about, though, that's actually about neighbour to neighbour. It's neighbours supporting each other. Because I think, one of the approaches to communities is that kind of doing for people, doing to people, which is what I was talking a bit about. But actually what you're talking about is you as a neighbour supporting your neighbours, and then noticing that starts to happen beyond yourself, and people then start to support each other.
Yeah.
Cool.
For example, my 2 blocks during the first lockdown, as a street connectors, we went around through the whole summer, knocking on people's doors and asking if there's anything they need, if there's anything that's missing. And then when we came to my 2 blocks, we knocked on the door and everybody had the same issue. We had the same problems with the flat. The communal garden was run out. The council were not doing much for us. And then we just asked, well, what is it that you can do for yourself? And then this whole thing started, that the 2 blocks within 12 families came together and they decided to fix the garden, the communal garden. And so we did, and we bonded over. I mean, some of us has lived here for a very long time, and some of them are quite new. But the bond that we had from previous was just hello and hi, like everybody knew everyone, quite friendly with each other. The kids used to play together, but it wasn't more than that. And during this project that we're doing, and we were tidying up the garden, fixing things for the garden for the kids, and having parties, just coming out and doing things together, actually did so much for so many different people in so many different levels. It was first lockdown, people would be scared of everything. And then we became so close. I think we wouldn't be able to be that close if it was an epidemic. And secondly, I think everybody needed that time to just come out and to talk to someone else except their own family they've been stuck indoors with. And it was a nice thing to do for each other, and coming out and see what you've done, and people who feel proud about their surrounding. We feel so empowered, and all of that happened because we knocked on the door and said, there's things you can do yourself. What is it that you can do? Simple things like that started a whole project for the 2 blocks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as you say, there's quite a simple element to this, but it's about that intentional knocking on the door, having a conversation, getting to know your neighbour, and then asking questions like, well, what is it that you would do if you had the opportunity, and what would you love to do if your neighbours joined in? And I think the work that you've done in your block, as you just said, cooking for the neighbours, getting to know the neighbours, you kind of undersell that a little bit. That was really quite an important part of it. And then the street connectors could come in, and it was kind of fertile ground to say, well, what would you love to do together if you had the opportunity? And then obviously that common thing about the garden was something that everybody came together and said, yeah, we'd like to do something about the garden, and then kind of cracked on with a bit of help, but cracked on and did it. And yeah, it's brilliant. Absolutely fantastic.
It really is, yeah.
So Claire, do you want to tell us tell us a bit about your experience of living on the Firs and Bromford and actually moving away and then moving back?
Yeah, so I've been quite blessed. I was born and bred on Bromford. My mum, she was always busy herself in the neighbourhood. So I've had experience community life of Firs and Bromford my whole life. She was volunteer, she was a milk lady at the school, and I've sort of kept that sort of approach. Always did after school clubs, the local community, but I have found out at one moment of my life, things weren't going great, suffered very bad mental health, the house I was living in, despair, landlord not doing anything, and I just felt, new house, new me, it's going to make everything better. So we did, we uprooted and we moved away. The house was beautiful, it was amazing, but I was just a house on a row of other houses. I didn't know anybody, and even we tried to meet the neighbours and hello and everything that we were sort of used to on Bromford, going to the shop and being in the shop for an hour because you're chatting to people. We didn't fit in. So we sort of kept coming to Bromford, and we'd walk 40 minutes a day just to get there, just to do after school clubs and things like that. My daughter had a baby and felt a bit lonely on her own, a bit isolated. She felt in this area she'd be judged as a single parent, and so she didn't leave the house. So myself having a conversation with a few other parents, and it's like, we need a mother and toddler group. Now, I'm not talking about the area I'm living, I'm talking about the area, Bromford, that we moved away. And a few of us, few parents, let's start it. Again, we had a conversation before, and again, it was like, well, what do you guys want to do? And it's like, well, we want a mother and toddler group. So we actually did. We all got together and we started a mother and toddler group. And my daughter, she came down with a baby, and obviously we had quite a few people, and it just started a bit of confidence, a bit of, for my daughter, a bit of community life, having friends, having good people around. Another thing we did on Bromford is junk kitchen. Again, it was quite hard to get my daughter to come out, leave the house, and it was, come on, let's go, let's go. So we did. We come to this junk kitchen, and it was, for me, my daughter, it was like a day out. It was our meal out sort of thing, our treat. And it was surrounded by good people in the community, neighbours and friends. And that's how my daughter sort of, it built confidence up. Just by having conversations with people. There was a cooking group developed out of it, and my daughter was like, can I go to that? It was like, absolutely. So she'd walked 40 minutes on her own to go to this cooking group. It just carried on. As my granddaughter got that bit older, I looked around my area and I wanted her to meet neighbours. I wanted her to play out and have friends. So we made the decision of actually moving back, and the best decision. So not just myself involved in the community, my daughter is also involved, and she does after school groups, girls groups. My other daughter, who's got a partner, who's pregnant, she's actually moved back on because she feels it's the best place to bring children up, the community spirit.
And what is it about? I mean, you've said, you know, quite a bit about the experiences you had, but what is it about Firs and Bromford that really made you want to move back?
It's good people. It's we value the people. We're all the same. It doesn't matter where we come from. We're treated the same, and we all got the same dreams. We can have the same goals. We bring out people's talents. We want to big people up. We want to be friends. We want to be neighbours. We want to see people do well. It's not about what, oh, look at my house. It's like, how can I help you achieve your goals? So we big each other up. We help each other. We journey together. We break bread together. We cry together. It's a big journey, and we're always learning all the time. We do make mistakes, we're human, but we're always, what else can we do? How can we get better? Makes you feel warm, and we actually have good people around you. For me, with mental health, having good positive people around absolutely picks me up. And it's amazing to actually walk down the road and speak to somebody, have a conversation, and walk away feeling happy about myself, but also knowing you speaking to that neighbour, you've actually helped them as well by speaking to them, having a conversation and asking how they are.
Brilliant. So just to finish off this bit, so question to both of you, just a really brief, if there's one thing that you would love to say to this audience of people about what we do and the way we do it and the community that we live in, what would you love to say?
So for me, I love stories, getting to know people. Everyone's got a background, and finding out from roots. Listen to people. We've all got stories.
For me, I would say it's not the place that makes the community, it's the people. And yes, we do have quite a lot of issue within that area, within the council flat, within the outside area. It's quite run down. But then at the same time, I feel really blessed and quite proud to be among these people who live around this area. Because they're such a lovely people, and they will always be there for you and will always be help. And I don't think you will have that anywhere else. And I have moved a lot, so I've seen quite a lot.
Brilliant. Thank you both. We've run out of time, so I'll pass back over to Stephanie.
Thank you so much, the three of you, for sharing your stories. That was so brilliant to hear, and thank you very much from everyone, I'm sure. I hope you had a good conversation in your breakout rooms. You can see our conference scribe Katie's drawing of the session. Thank you very much for that, Katie. So in the chat we've got positivity, thinking and action. And the importance of sharing food and meeting people. Definitely, that's something that's really come out from today. Group 4 said, listening, wanting church to change, stop doing too, and see need for strong rather than wrong. Yeah, brilliant. Congregation, noticing the kingdom of God springing up in the community, bringing that excitement back to the gathered church. Yeah, I think that's something that really struck me from Al's story, is the church being present on the estate, but without that traditional church building on the estate. It's just a different way of being church and of being Christian in many ways, which is something that Al and Ruth talk about in their book, which is really important. Refusing to be a victim. Yeah, great. Talent and awareness of those facilitating. Yeah, I mean, thank you again to everyone that has spoken today. I'll thank you properly at the end as well. Looking for the community's gifts and talents, move away from a focus on deprivation. What can we do to help change church culture from delivering projects to listening to what communities want? Yeah, that's something else that from the conversations I've had with Paul, very much on the estate, not a project focused language of gathering. In fact, Paul, would you like to say a bit about that? Why is project the wrong word?
Yeah, I think the project language doesn't quite work in the sense of when you think of a community. I think when you get into project language, you start thinking of purely your project outcomes and organizational structures, rather than this is a neighborhood, this is a community, this is a place, and it's interconnections and it's and the relationships that evolve. So yeah, although it is street connecting is a project, I think we do that language doesn't quite work.
Thank you. And yeah, a comment to thank Al for briefly sharing some of the theology that led you to the ABCD approach. That's really good to have heard as well. Brilliant. I think unfortunately we are out of time for this workshop. We could have done a whole conference just on ABCD because there's so much to be said. But please join me in thanking Al, Paul, Sarah and Claire for speaking to us today and sharing your stories. And it's been brilliant to hear from you. So thank you very much indeed from all of the project team.